And I would like to will introduce Dawn Hoagland. Dawn is going to be doing her presentation first. And I just want to read a little bit about Dawn's background. Dawn is a public school teacher in Peekskill, New York. She has been teaching for 17 years, including 5 years in District 9 in the Bronx. She is a politically active citizen who regularly contacts her local, state, and federal representatives to weigh in on important issues. Dawn writes the education column for the local paper, the Woodbury Gazette in Orange County, where she lives. Her articles are also posted on many blogs and websites, including newswithviews.com. She is an outspoken critic of the Common Core, all outcome-based education, annual standardized testing for all, tying teacher evaluations to student test scores, education delivered on a computer, tax-funded charter schools with no elected school boards, and most of the current reform policies being implemented, reform quote-unquote, policies being implemented in New York right now. She has spoken at Regents Forum's legislative and town council meetings, Board of Ed meetings, and to school faculty. Dawn will present a compelling story about the origins of the Common Core and its ultimate effects on our children and our society. She will discuss what forces are behind the push for a one-size-fits-all outcome-based education system. So Dawn, let's give Dawn a big hand.
Thank you very much for coming. I have nothing more to say about myself. She pretty much covered all the bases. So, I'm here to speak about the Common Core, and as you've been able to read from the first slide, that the Common Core is not for everyone. Obama, his daughter's here, they don't go to any school that teaches the Common Core. They go to Sidwell Friends, a nice private school. So does Bill Gates' children, so does Arnie Duncan's children, so does John King. Anyone that's involved in really pushing these mandates forward, their own children are not experiencing it. So to me, that's a huge clue. They're lying. Because if they thought that this was really the greatest thing since sliced bread, they'd say, yeah, I want some of that for my children. But they're obviously not doing that. So I think that's the biggest way that we can know that they have no intention but foisting something on us that they don't want for themselves. So the Common Core is anti-human. It's a one-size-fits-all standardized system of control, surveillance, and constant testing. And they're treating children like lab rats or pigeons. You know, it's behaviorism, it's Skinnerism. It's we can make these kids do whatever we want. We just, you know, put the right stimulus and we'll get the right result. And it has nothing to do with recognizing that people are created in the image of God. So you can't have both ideas. Either you believe people are created in the image of God, or you believe that people have no souls and they're equal in value to every other animal. And so you can manipulate them in any way you want if you believe that. And that's Mr. Skinner right there, playing with pigeons. And John Rockefeller, the old guy way back in, you know, the oil magnate, he had a lot to do with beginning this whole education changes that happened in the United States. He spent more money on education, along with Andrew Carnegie, than the government did from 1900 to 1920. So that, you know, the people of the United States didn't really know what was going on. They were just throwing their money around, a lot like Bill Gates is doing now, to just change things. And Rockefeller also founded the National Alliance of Education, and he donated the land on which the United Nations sits. And he used his endowments to spread the ideas of Wilhelm Wundt. And you may not have heard of this man, but he was a philosopher, professor over in Leipzig University in Germany. And a lot of our American citizens went there to study with him, and they brought his ideas back. And so that's where we ultimately get behaviorism from. He said, man has no soul, just supply the correct stimulus to get the desired result. That's what we're dealing with today with the Common Core. John Dewey, a lot of teachers have like some kind of, warm heart for him, but I don't, because I see what he brought in. And he totally was on board with Wundt. And he knows that if you apply the stimulus, you get the result. That's behaviorism. There's nothing to do with teaching truth and beauty and respect for humanity in that. He believed that the state would bring up children better than parents, and that, the worst thing he did was he took phonics out of the classroom, because to me, the greatest gift you can give somebody is teach them to read, because it opens the world to them. And he just said, no, we're gonna try a different way. We're gonna learn how to just memorize words, just the look-say method, and that wrecked education. And he knew it, but he continued to do it. And the funny thing is that John Rockefeller put his own 4 children, Nelson and David and all the guys, in John Dewey's school, his lab school, and they all grew up dyslexic, not being able to read. And they've even admitted that at speeches. They wouldn't read their speeches, they'd have to memorize them. That's a picture of John Taylor Gatto. He was a teacher of the year in New York City. He eventually quit because he just couldn't take it anymore. But he said when you take the free will out of education, that makes it schooling. The real purpose of modern schooling was announced by the legendary sociologist Edward Roth in his manifesto of 1906 called Social Control. In it he wrote, "Plans are underway to replace family, community, and church with propaganda, mass media, and education." Of course he meant schooling. People are only little plastic lumps of dough. So that's what they think of us. And this is another amazing man. This is Bertrand Russell. He quoted Johann Gottlieb Fichte, and he said, "Education should aim at destroying free will." Can you imagine somebody actually saying that? So that after pupils, he said, I could teach children, I can train them to think that snow is black. I can get to the point that they will actually believe that snow is black. And once we've accomplished that, for a couple generations, governments will no longer need armies or police. So that's what they're going for. Complete total control of the mind. Is the Common Core designed to destroy minds? Well, a standardized curriculum and all the tests will eventually be delivered by computers. So if you only have input-output, what kind of discovery is going on there? You're not really discovering anything. So there's a correct answer for everything, and true education has to do with questions. Sometimes you don't even know what the right questions are. And just as you're exploring an issue or a subject, then you come up with questions you never even knew should even exist. So the idea that there's a correct question and a correct answer is bizarre. When will students have an opportunity to discover universal principles and the truth about anything? Will the Common Core end America as we know it? It's designed to destroy the concept of progress. If our children are not encouraged to imagine, invent, and innovate, there will be no new leaders and no future for America. Now, there's a professor, Yang Zhao, that comes from China. And he's here now. I believe he's, American citizen and everything. And he spends his entire time just going around America. He's written books. One is called World-Class Learners, and the other is Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Dragon. But basically, he's making fun of China and saying, look, we know how to take tests. We have students that can ace all the tests. But they're just good test takers. They don't become scientists. They don't invent anything. They have no innovation. They have no desire, no passion to do anything. And so now, America, that is known for innovation, that has had lots of patents and lots of inventions, is now copying China and saying, oh, we want to be good test takers. He's like, no, don't do it. Don't go there. Because he makes this funny analogy. He says, because America has only 1/4 the population of China, just by statistics, China should have 4 Steve Jobs by now. And he said, we have 0. We have no Steve Jobs. So, why do you want to emulate a country that doesn't end up with innovating anything? And that is a good point. David Rockefeller, one of the dyslexic boys. You know, he's been accused of doing things that are against the United States, of being an internationalist. And so on page 405 of his memoirs, he finally admits that it's true. He says, "Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, a one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." So this is something that he founded, the Club of Rome. You know, they always have these crazy names. When you start talking about this stuff, people are like, what are you talking about, Club of Rome? But it was just a place that was founded by David Rockefeller on an estate that he owns in Bellagio, Italy. And some of the members are people like Al Gore. But they got together for this meeting, and they decided that they needed some kind of common enemy that people could rally around. And so they decided, what's the one thing that everybody has in common? The air. You know, what from every country, every nation, we all share the environment. So they said, well, okay, so let's use global warming. Let's use water shortages, famine, and things like that to unite humanity and say that through human attitudes and behavior, we've messed up the earth. So we need to curb our behaviors and attitudes to straighten things out. And so then the real enemy then is humanity itself. And the Club of Rome is known for saying the earth has cancer and the cancer is man. So in 1971, the EPA was instituted, also the Declaration of World Citizenship. And in 1987, the UN report, Our Common Future, stated that education is the primary agent of transformation towards sustainable development. So they've been planning on using education to shove this in for many years. The RAND Corporation has been hugely instrumental in inserting change agents into the education system. Because you say, how do these things happen? Well, it's very deliberate and it's tax funded. That's the worst thing. We paid for this. So in 1971, the US Office of Education, now committed to gaining access to your private lives and thoughts, granted contracts for 7 volumes of change agent studies to the RAND Corporation. Change agent training was launched with federal funding under the Education Professions Development Act. And what that means is places like the NEA would host conferences, and they would have teachers come and they would brainwash them and say, this is what you're going to do now. So, government funded deliberate dumbing down of education in the 70s. Academic subjects such as math, science, and history have been deliberately hollowed out of their content. A moral, independent thinking person threatens the goal of the change agent, which is the replacement of the moral authority of the family with that of the state. So this school advocate, Gerald Bracey, he reveals in an essay, he says, we must continue to produce an uneducated social class. So they're deliberately doing this. Government by nature seeks power for its own sake. This requires a docile, semi-literate populace focused on external stimulants such as entertainment and controlled substances. Does that sound like anyone you know? Who's in charge, the US or the UN? This guy made a deal with the NEA that if they would support him, he would begin the Federal Department of US Education. That was a big mistake. So he did it, and he won. Sustainable development is the politically correct term for Agenda 21. It's a plan published after the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, sponsored by the United Nations, hosted by Maurice Strong. George Bush Sr. and the leaders of 178 countries signed the agreement. And I don't think people really know that 1,500 NGOs attended this thing because they wanted to get in on the ground floor of making money of helping countries go green. And UNESCO is the education arm of Agenda 21. And Maurice Strong is famous for getting up and saying, eating meat, having air conditioning at your home and in your office, having a private home in the suburbs and a car in the driveway, all of these things are unsustainable. Eliot Engel and Nancy Pelosi embraced Agenda 21. So in 1992, right after all the people came back from this conference and they had all signed on, George Bush signed on. It was a non-binding treaty, but he signed it, and so did 178 heads of nations. I wish I could run this video, but I can't. I don't have it hooked up to the Wi-Fi. But basically, Eliot Engel, who's right here in Rockland, he introduces this resolution that says, we totally embrace all of the ideas and mandates of Agenda 21, and we want to implement them as soon as possible. So anybody that's in government that says, oh, I never heard of Agenda 21, if they've been around since 1992, they're lying. Dear Hillary, this is a very famous letter, and the only reason we know about it is because this guy, Bob Schaefer, he put it into the congressional record. Not when it happened. He did it in 1998 because he realized this piece of information is historical and it's going to come around to bite us again. And he was correct. Because this guy, Mark Tucker, he's not really anything. He's just the head of some made-up, organization like the head of the Center of Education and Economy. And he lays out this master plan for economic planning of the United States, where he will, basically have a computer database where children's information will be inserted, and the state, the military, corporations can just recruit whoever they want from that database. In 1994, Clinton signed into law Goals 2000 and School to Work Act. This is a Soviet-style outcome-based system, completely against classical American education. And the idea was to bypass all elected officials. So if, all the representatives should be here, because they don't understand that their jobs are going to be eliminated by this. This is an end run around their power. So they don't get it. The use of a computer database to create a labor market information system into which school personnel would scan all information about every school child and his family, identified by the child's social security number, academic, medical, mental, psychological, behavioral, and interrogations by counselors. That's scary. The computerized data would be available to the school, the government, and future employers. The Common Core teaches new values and attitudes. The tests will assess how each child will be valued as a global citizen. Through testing, the state will be able to decide the appropriate level of resources for the training of each child. Children will be labeled and sorted. This is a book that was actually published by the U.S. Department of Education on February 14th, 2013. It's called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance. They first put it right on their website with all the pictures and everything with it, but then parents saw it and were so outraged by it that they took it down. But people that, did screenshots and all that, we still have the information, and I can grab the slide from then. But if you look for it now, it's hard to find. 400 data points on each child will be collected and shared. Biometric tools will be used to obtain this data. I'll show you that in a minute. A computer-generated resume containing attendance, academic, and disciplinary records will go directly from school to employer. A child's future will be limited and tightly controlled. So 24 states agreed to do this. These are the biometric tools. They have all kind of weird names like facial expression camera, things like that. So of course states get bribed to take this stuff on by being dangling grants in front of them. you say, how can this be allowed? Aren't we the land of the free, and don't we have some kind of protections for privacy? Well, we used to. In 1974, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act was created to protect student privacy. But Obama changed the FERPA laws in December 2011 just by executive order, not by going back to Congress, to give the private sector access to personal student data in response to Duncan and Bill Gates. Arnie Duncan and Bill Gates said, this thing we're creating, this Common Core, is not going to work unless we have access to a lot of data, unless we can put it in a cloud and it becomes interoperable and we can share it between states and share it with companies. It's just not going to work. So Obama said, all right, an executive order, I'll just change it, that's it. So if medical care is administered at the school, then they're not going to call them health records anymore because health records are protected by HIPAA. But they're going to call them educational records. And they're just going to say that they're accessible to third parties. I could go on and on about Bill Gates, but I think you all know about him. Data mining our children. Sensitive information will also be extracted, which delves into the intimate details of students' lives, political affiliations of the student or the parent, mental and psychological problems of the student or the student's family, sex behavior or attitudes, illegal, antisocial, self-incriminating, and demeaning behavior, critical appraisals of other individuals with whom respondents have close family relationships, legally recognized privilege or analogous relationships, such as those of lawyers, physicians, and ministers, religious practices, affiliations, or beliefs of the student's parent, and income. So you say, how is this going to be done? How are they going to change the minds of the way we act now? We're brought up to be individuals with the concept of privacy. So how can a few oligarch families get the American people to give up the American dream, a good education, and the Constitution? How do you push in sustainable development and smart growth? Well, you teach environmentalism as a religion to our children. The Ark of Hope contains the Earth Charter. Have you ever seen this thing? No. They're so rude to call it an ark anyway, because obviously they're playing on the concept of the biblical Ark, the Covenant. So it's an actual wooden ark that was created by an artist up in Vermont, and she and some friends walked it down to New York, I think, and then they put it on the Clearwater sloop, and they floated it down the Hudson to the UN, where it's housed now, so that children can come and worship at the ark? No. There's pictures of trees and animals and suns and moons and all kinds of stuff all around the ark, and it's also filled with these books called Temenos books and the Earth Charter. And Mikhail Gorbachev hopes that the Earth Charter will replace the Ten Commandments soon. This is what we're dealing with. Robert Mueller, the prophet of hope at the UN for 40 years. This is another name we don't really hear that often, but he's actually a kingpin in all of this because he was like a nut job that brought in all this New Age religion and everything into the UN and spread it around the whole US. And he was requested to write a World Core curriculum. That was back in the 80s. He wrote it, and there are Robert Mueller schools all around the world. And it's that World Core curriculum that is now the Common Core. So all this baloney about, oh yes, it was state-led, and it was Achieve, and it was David Coleman, that's more lies. It comes straight out of the UN. Bill Gates pledges allegiance to the UN. In 2004, he signs a cooperative agreement with UNESCO. The agreement defines 8 areas in which UNESCO and Microsoft will work together. Area 6 is fostering web-based communities of practice, including content development and worldwide curricula reflecting UNESCO values. So he's here saying, yep, I'm going to use all my expertise, and I'm going to use Microsoft as a platform. We're going to put everything on a computer. We're going to make it a worldwide curriculum. We'll get it everywhere. Every child in the planet will be studying the same thing at the same time. Won't it be great? So 2010, Arnie Duncan speaks at UNESCO. So people that say, oh, you know, the United Nations doesn't have anything to do with the US government, especially the education department, really? So he speaks to UNESCO and he says, transformational reform especially takes time in the United States. That goal can only be achieved by creating a strong cradle-to-career continuum that starts with early childhood learning and extends all the way to college and careers. So Arnie's vision of schools is that they would be open 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, offering 3 meals a day, offering health care, offering mental health care. Public-private partnerships with NGOs will help keep schools open many hours every day, year-round. Will the state raise our children? Teach for America can provide college graduates that have been trained for 5 weeks to teach our children. So it took me 5 years, you know, to train to become a teacher, but they're going to do it in 5 weeks and they'll be equal. We have the same training, apparently. And JP Morgan thinks that the same qualities that you need to be in charge of a classroom are things that they would like to see an investment banker have. So they're making this partnership between Teach for America and JP Morgan where they say, yeah, you go work for a couple years in some inner city school and we'll hold a position for you at JP Morgan and then you come out and you be an investment banker. And that's how that works. Very bizarre. So that teaching is no longer a profession or a career. It'll be more or less like the Peace Corps. They'll just have these young kids coming out of college. Just do that for a couple of years and then go on to your real job. The Education for Sustainability Toolkit. This was first published in 2002 by the US government down in Tennessee, but now it is reprinted and published by UNESCO. So what is that, you know, is it a US document? Is it a UN document? Why is there a mixing there? And here it says, generally more highly educated people who have higher incomes consume more resources than poorly educated people who tend to have lower incomes. So they're saying, we don't really want to make people too smart because then they're just going to consume too much stuff. So let's just keep them a little bit dumb. There's all kind of Agenda 21 doublespeak. So when they say education, they really mean indoctrination into believing that nature is more important than man, that the group is more important than the individual. The new purpose of education is to learn values, not facts, and students must become global citizens, not American citizens. And all of this becomes very apparent if you look at the actual tests that the Common Core line materials have now, because you will see a lot of brainwashing there. A lot of things about environmentalism, a lot of things about how the collective is better than the individual and how you know, students have to be global citizens constantly. Equity actually means theft of private property, open borders, remove God, morality and responsibility. When they talk about economy, they actually mean a redistribution of wealth, outsource jobs, close factories, create massive unemployment here in the US, but create opportunities for all those third world countries because we've had our time in the sun. That's over now. Just to be fair and equitable, it's time for us to just send our jobs overseas and let those people rise while we go down. Environment equals nature is more important than man. The new God is Mother Earth, and phony science, such as global warming, regulations destroy energy and independence. This is brilliant, the way this guy, Dean Callagher, puts this. He says, who controls the content of the Common Core? Because the Common Core is actually an empty skill set. It's, if you look at the standards, it's things like, the child shall be able to write a paragraph or 3 sentences. You know, there's no content to it. So you say, well, who's going to control that? So in fact, the US Department of Education has already started a Common Core technical review process of test, item, design, and validation. The test writing stage is where the specifics of content, or in this case, progressive ideologies, are inserted. Test questions need content and context, and since Common Core is about subjective processes, the content can be added without ever notifying the public. After content is tied to test questions, textbook manufacturers can write the necessary content into their products. Once you have a textbook in front of a teacher, the teacher has to teach from the textbook. And then from the progressively driven textbooks, and the circle will effectively be complete. Herein, we see the dirty little secret. If the government can control what is tested, then it controls the curriculum. So what's wrong with the Common Core? Many students will fail the new Common Core. You know, John King predicted that 2/3 of the students would fail in New York State, and 2/3 of the students failed in New York State. And he also collected all the tests first before he even set the cut scores. So it's like, of course he can control who fails and who doesn't. Teachers will be labeled ineffective when this happens, and after 2 years of an ineffective rating, teachers can be fired, so that your tenure means nothing now. And principals will be fired, because if too many teachers are ineffective, they're saying, well, you know, you're not a good leader. Traditional public schools will be shut down and replaced by for-profit charter schools. Some people in the liberty movement think that charter schools are a good thing, because they're thinking, well, you know, public education hasn't been doing a great job. We think we can do it ourselves better with a charter school. Let's try. But they're not understanding that charter schools are publicly funded. Your tax dollars go into them. But they're not audited in the same way that a regular public school is. So, and the way they garner their profits is by taking it out of teacher salaries. So instead of, they don't have the same mandates that a regular public school has. So they don't have to hire certified teachers. They can hire Teach for America teachers that have only been trained for 5 weeks in the summer, and they can pay them $5 an hour or whatever they want to pay them. And so that's where they take the profit from. And then they can pay their managers $500,000 a year or whatever they want to do. And you can't say anything about it because they have unelected school boards. So you can't, if you don't like their discipline policies, you know, they're constantly sending kids out. They say, oh, you're not a good fit for this school. You know, so they just say, no, we're not accepting you. They don't have a lot of special ed kids in their charter schools. And they're not doing a better job than the regular public schools. So people that are for charters are really not understanding the issues. Charter schools are not what they used to be. The race to the top mandated that each state lift its cap on charter schools. I think New York used to have a cap of 200, and now it was raised to like 400. And if Cuomo and Merrill Tisch have their way, they would just take the cap off completely. They would just have all charter schools. And I have to say something about Merrill here, because her brother-in-law, Andrew Tisch, he sits on the board of K-12 Incorporated, which is the largest online learning industry here in the United States. So they create curriculum. So Merrill Tisch is in charge of approving charter schools, and then Andrew Tisch will get a phone call that says, send us some of that K-12 over here. So to me, that's a huge conflict of interest. Charter schools are using public funding for private profit, and they fail to educate our children, they reject challenging students, and they overuse suspension. If they're having trouble with the kid, they're just like, out. You know, public schools don't do that. Charter schools have unelected school boards, and parents have no impact on budgets, curriculum, or discipline policies. Charles Koch once said, I want my fair share, and that's all of it. The New Markets Tax Credit that was created under Clinton allows banks and equity funds that invest in charter schools and other projects in underserved areas to take advantage of a 39% tax credit. And that's not even the whole thing. They also get all these other tax credits for creating jobs in underprivileged places, and they make all kinds of money in addition to that as well. So that it amounts to doubling the amount of their investment after 7 years. So all they have to do is keep that school open for 7 years. Doesn't matter if they're failing the kids, doesn't matter if there's all kind of stuff going on there that they don't like. Keep those doors open for 7 years, they will double their money. And then they can just pay off their bondholders and walk away, which is many times what they do. This thing, the EB5 is outrageous. Foreign investors are funding, are investing in charter schools here in the United States, because if they invest $500,000, they are allowed to purchase immigration visas for themselves and their family. So my best advice to everyone is get to know the vocabulary of being green. When somebody says to you, do you want to be sustainable? You have to just think, do you want to be tightly controlled? And if somebody says to you, do you want more public-private partnerships? You have to think, do you want to live like a serf in your own country? And that is the end of my presentation.